So the original version of Yac was just called Yelling Across Cubicles. It's actually what Yac stands for. And it was actually real time. It wasn't asynchronous. It was real time voice. It was like a walkie talkie for your Mac menu bar. And it was really cool. And we loved using it. And we used it all the time until it got really freaking annoying. It was super annoying. People's would just like voices would come out of my computer. I'd be like on an important investor call, and one of my, founders would just like instantly connect with me on this walkie talkie. And I'm like, oh, shut up. I didn't, mute this app. I forgot to do not disturb, whatever. And it became this thing I had to manage. And there was this moment where I was like, the fix is not, being able to disturb anybody at any time, because that's almost the same as meetings, maybe even worse because it's unscheduled. The fix is allowing me to use my voice in a way that doesn't disturb anybody and allows them to have time flexibility for them to be heads down, focused, grinding out on whatever they want to do throughout the day, instead of calls all throughout the day and then a tiny bit of work at the end, or work throughout the day and a bunch of calls chopping it up randomly in between because Yac was just on their computer and people were yelling through their speakers all the day.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Podium Stories. Today we have a very special guest. His name is Justin. He's the founder and CEO of Yac. Yac is a very interesting product. I'll let Justin go over it. Today we're going to talk about how companies should work asynchronously, how remote work has affected us, and what Justin and his team are working on to kind of make companies' life easier. Justin, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I can dive right into that elevator pitch for Yac if that's the best way to do this.
Yeah, I love that. So obviously, I know what Yac is about, but for the audience that is listening, give us like the 60-second elevator pitch to kind of give them some context.
Yeah, the 5-second elevator pitch is Yac is a way to stay out of meetings, right? So if you can stay out of meetings, that's mission accomplished for us. And we're thinking sort of through the phases of what a company is going to look like in 5 years. And, a big part of that is a global economy where you're hiring from anywhere and you're working from anywhere and anytime. And, the big limiting factor for a company there is synchronous meetings, real-time video calls like the one you and I are on right now. And if we can get rid of those, then everything else is unlocked. Time flexibility, location flexibility, hiring flexibility. Where you work is now flexible. You can work from anywhere, location-wise or company-wise. And so Yac is a way to share voice and video messages back and forth very easily, very quickly, without prep, without editing, trimming, clipping. It's not a production studio. This is raw back and forth communication. The idea here is talk more throughout the day, and then you don't have to hop on these meetings. And our goal is to have that done through voice, because we feel really strongly that in a remote team, one of the things that you have is you either have a company that's really high on meetings, tons and tons of calls, and they're always in sync, but they're never getting any work done. And then the flip side of that is you don't have any meetings and everything's like text-based and emotions flare. There's no tone and emotion. It's hard to, build relationships with your team. And so we found that kind of like sweet spot right in the middle, which is, well, if you can use your voice, which is the key part of like a video call like this, hearing other humans and being able to interface with them like we do in real life. And you can do that in a way that's not time dependent, it's not tied to your schedule or your calendar, then boom, we've got a magic formula.
I love that. Take us back to your origin story, right? How did Justin end up building this company? Obviously, we all hate meetings. Is there an inflection point where you're like, I need to get rid of this and find a way to like solve this? How did we get here?
I've been working in rope for a long time, and I worked with this big agency that had a pretty global presence. They were fully remote. They had a huge team in Costa Rica. And what I found is that most people were getting all of their work done at like 8 p.m. at night. Why? Because that was when it was quiet and they could focus for once, right? Kids were asleep, dinner was done, and most importantly, no one was having meetings now because, we don't schedule meetings after 5 p.m. Like that would be rude. But we can do it from 9 to 5 every single hour, and that's somehow totally okay. And so everyone's getting all their work done at like 8 p.m. at night. And I was like, this is a horrible work-life balance. Like 8 p.m. at night, I want to be sitting on the couch watching TV with my wife. I don't want to be just now sitting down to do my work for the day. And what I realized was that a lot of these meetings came out of like a fear. It wasn't like we actually felt like we needed the meeting. It was we were afraid that somebody wasn't synced up, somebody wasn't on the same page, nobody, knew what was going on. And so we're going to spin this meeting up because that fixes this problem of communication. And, one could lean in one direction and say, well, why don't you just email more or Slack more or whatever your chosen tool is? And what I found, especially in the companies that I've been working with, is, well, that's where people get pissed off. They get, miscommunications. People say things that are harsh. I found even with my own team, I used to leave a bunch of comments on like Figma or Envision, and my designer would do something and I would leave a comment and I'd just be like, this sucks, redo it. And then she'd be like, oh my God, like Justin hates my work.
So
like he hates me. I'm terrible at my job. This is, I'm like, no, like, I just don't have the time. And so I'm saying this sucks, try again, because I just don't like it. But when I leave a voice message with the exact same content, they can tell that I'm saying, hey, I'm not a big fan of this. You're a great designer, but like, let's try again, because you can hear me, they know me, they understand me. And voice was the thing that really made the difference there. And so I started thinking about like, how do we fix this problem of too many meetings, and the solution being miscommunications and flaring emotions. So I had to find something in the middle. So the original version of Yac was just called Yelling Across Cubicles. It's actually what Yac stands for. And it was actually real time. It wasn't asynchronous. It was real time voice. It was like a walkie-talkie for your Mac menu bar. And it was really cool. And we loved using it. And we used it all the time until it got really freaking annoying. It was super annoying. People's would just like voices would come out of my computer. I'd be like on an important investor call, and one of my, founders would just like instantly connect with me on this walkie-talkie. And I'm like, oh, shut up. I didn't, mute this app. I forgot to do not disturb, whatever. And it became this thing I had to manage. And there was this moment where I was like, the fix is not, being able to disturb anybody at any time, because that's almost the same as meetings, maybe even worse because it's unscheduled. The fix is allowing me to use my voice in a way that doesn't disturb anybody and allows them to have time flexibility for them to be heads down, focused, grinding out on whatever they want to do throughout the day, instead of calls all throughout the day and then a tiny bit of work at the end, or work throughout the day and a bunch of calls chopping it up randomly in between because Yac was just on their computer and people were yelling through their speakers all the day. So, we started with this premise of like, how do we get people communicating in a richer, higher bandwidth form, which we believe is voice and screen shares? And then we transitioned into, okay, how do we do that in a way that's not inconvenient, annoying, and interruptive? And that's where we landed on asynchronous voice and video.
I love that. At the end of the day, what you guys are kind of giving people is freedom, right? Like not only freedom of work, but also freedom of location and time scale. And it was a freedom that used to be only for like solopreneurs that could work from anywhere.
Yeah.
But now if we can give this to everybody in the company, now we're making the whole organization a bit more free. I wonder what, as you guys talk to companies switching to Yac or thinking about considering how to like become more asynchronous, what are some of the main challenges that they face, or what are some of their main fears, objections that you guys kind of get of like, I'm not sure if that's going to work out because of XYZ? What does XYZ?
Everything, literally everything. It starts with asynchronous. People are not used to that, and it's funny, they are in a way. Like we've been emailing for years, like that's asynchronous communication, and we still email, but people have been doing that for so long, they understand I'm not going to get a response back in 5 minutes. It is baked into their system. But we've built things like Slack and Zoom and all these other tools that have created this sense of kind of like instant gratification. And that's what people are comfortable with. That's what they're used to. That's what the way that they want to work. It's not the right way to work, in our opinion. That's what we're rallying against, is this idea that everything needs an answer immediately, need to be available all the time. Your green status indicator on Slack needs to stay that way. And so, what we're seeing in the market is this, hey, I want to go asynchronous. And then, oh, that means I have to wait. I have to be patient. Well, what if somebody is waiting on information to do something? It's okay. Let them wait. A little bit of waiting is not going to hurt you. Unless there is a pants on fire, the server is down type of situation, like you can call somebody. Phone calls exist. Like, we're not telling you to never pick up the phone. We're telling you your default mode of communication should not be spamming messages across a chat channel or constantly calling or booking messages or meetings with somebody. And so, for us, it's really everything. It's the idea of a calm asynchronous communication style. People are not used to that. Everything is instant and, immediate. You see typing indicators and you sit there and you wait. What are they typing? I got to sit here and be here for this. I don't know why.
It looks like a long message. They've been typing for a minute.
Right. And like, really, it was just, they like left their app open or something while they went to the bathroom. But, that's a thing that we're used to. It's what we're comfortable with. And so breaking people out of that is really the struggle that, we've seen, is that they have to kind of break these norms that they've been used to for so many years and really rethink not only just how they communicate, but also just how they work, what their expectations are of their team, how they, communicate to their team, those expectations. And it all comes back to kind of that calm, asynchronous environment. Now, it's been interesting as we obviously are building something to enable a global economy here, a global workforce. Latin America, China, the UK, very used to voice messages. Like they do it all the time in WhatsApp and WeChat and things like that.
In Europe, we do it too. That's how I communicate with everybody back home.
Very normal thing. In fact, the reason why we ended up going with voice messages is I watched my friend from Costa Rica voice message his wife while we were working on site. And I went, oh, this is cool. Like he can listen with headphones on, with like an AirPod in, and just continue doing stuff with his hands. It's like hands-free. And then he can reply back and he's not like glued to his phone. His head's not down. He's not walking, typing away like a zombie. It was actually like this really cool experience where he was able to kind of continue what he was doing and have these very rich emotional conversations with his wife. And I was like, damn, that's how work should be. Like, that's exactly how work should be. Not interrupting me, but rich and high bandwidth, lots of information. You're hearing that person's voice. You're able to build a relationship with them. So WhatsApp was, big inspiration for this. So the other barrier that we actually fight is in the US, people are not used to sending voice messages. And most of the voice messaging interfaces are really bad. Like iMessage's voice system is garbage. There's no transcription. If your like phone falls asleep while you're listening, it resets the message. Like it's a horrible, horrible experience. So when you're trying to sell somebody like, imagine voice messaging for work, and they're like, yeah, that dumpster fire, like I would not want to use that. So it's hard to tell people like, no, we swear we've made a better version of something that you hate. And they're like, yeah, I don't really want to try that. Right. So there are definitely a lot of, hurdles to overcome here. And I think there's a lot of companies doing asynchronous voice, video. You got your Looms and even stuff like Notion. That's, really async at the end of the day. Like people are getting into this stuff, but no one's like really cracked the code of back and forth async. And so, we're along for the ride with the big players like Doist, who's working on Twist, trying to like mold this new future of asynchronous work.
I love that. Yeah. This reminds me, I've talked a couple of times with Tyler Tringas, who's a VC, and he has this concept of calm companies, right? And I think that's part of it. It's hard to be a calm company if you don't have calm communication within that.
Some of the stuff I just said, I stole directly from Tyler's blog because Tyler was actually our second investor. He wrote a blog right after we had built the prototype to this, and I read it and I was like, oh my God, this is literally my mission. Like you wrote exactly why I want to exist. So I literally DM'd him on Twitter. I was like, dude, you have to be involved. Like your brain is exactly what I was working on. Like it's insane how close it was.
Yeah, we're talking about the same blog post because I read that maybe once a month because for my company, like we're a bootstrap self-funded company. Like we're not going to be 1,000 people. That's not even the goal. The goal is to build a business that is calm and fits what me and my team are looking for. And calm asynchronous communication is a big part of that. It's very interesting because sometimes I'm looking from the outside, it can feel like you guys are fighting a market that needs to change. It's a bit resistant to that change. I was wondering, what are some of like the KPIs or numbers or metrics that you guys kind of look at for the people using Yac and think, okay, they're taking value out of this? Like, is this like hours saved from meetings? Like, how do you guys kind of like measure success with clients or with customers?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because what you said right there at the end is really the KPI that we're trying to figure out, which is time saved. But unless you like tell us how much time you've saved, it's hard to calculate that. We could guess, we could say for every Yac, every third Yac message, that equals like a meeting saved. We could make some calculation based off that, but it's fairly difficult. So, we're actually working on a brand new product. It's a riff on the existing product, a little bit more simpler, stripped down. And, we were thinking, we're putting together our KPIs, and the first one that came across the table was like, okay, number of Yacs sent. Like that's, you're being successful if you've sent a lot of messages. And then we kind of had this moment where we're like, well, it's really like number of meetings ended. Like if you are having an asynchronous meeting on Yac and you finish it, and it's this thing that happened, an event happens where you go, we solved a problem, I got the feedback I needed, my question was answered, whatever that thing is, that's where you go, success, right? Like that was a successful moment. So it's sort of this blend of like, if I could take a Zoom meeting and convert it over to Yac meeting, that's huge for us. If you take something off your calendar and, you know, move it async, that's success in our eyes. But we're also kind of like moving from this idea of like, well, our KPIs are number of people, you know, chatting, down to really it's, okay, well, the number of times you have a successful asynchronous meeting on Yac, that is our KPI right now. And that's what our North Star is that we're looking at.
Yeah, I love that. It's very interesting. I was interviewing somebody on the podcast last season who is honestly probably like the opposite of what Yac means. He runs this SaaS company, basically like a similar type of Calendly, and they got acquired. And he was talking about how defining one KPI that might not be like the best KPI for you, but might be the best KPI for the user, and then just focusing on that and seeing that number grow, and then not even really looking at the rest, is how the company kind of grew and evolved. So that was interesting, and I was wondering kind of the same thing. That KPI makes a lot of sense for you guys. One thing that I wanted to ask you, in this new world, right? Like I think Yac is really creating or helping build that new world of remote asynchronous. What are some of the skills that employees need to have to be successful? Right? Because it seems like there are different skills that if we're in the same office and you and I think next to each other, there are different type of skills and even personality traits that are better fitted for that space. What skills are great and personality traits are better fitted, or what do we unlock when we let people work remotely in asynchronous?
You know, we wrote down a list of stuff just when we were hiring of like key traits that we're looking for when we're hiring for anything. And one of the big ones is being a self-starter and being a self-solver. You know, one of the problems that people say exists in async is like, well, if I have a question and I need an answer immediately, I'm stuck and I can't do anything. And that slows down productivity and the whole company comes to a halt, whatever that horrible future that the managers think exists. And really that's solved by saying, be a self-solver. Google things, learn how to be very good at finding answers on your own. I think one of the biggest things for me, and you know, I think if you've grown up in like IT and tech at all, you've always, you know, understood that someone's going to ask you to fix their printer, right? And one of my favorite things is I would like fix stuff on my parents' computer and they'd be like, no, slow down. Like you need to show me how I can do this in the future. And I'm like, I don't know how to do this. Like, you think I was just born with like innate printer solving knowledge? Like all I'm doing is Googling things and right clicking things. And like, you know, like HP didn't put like a manual in me at birth and I just like know how to fix your printer. Like you just went, it's broken and then stopped trying. Like I'm just here clicking a bunch of stuff until it works. And that trait is so important in a remote team, is just being able to go out there and try and self-solve whatever your problem is. And it's funny, like we really put like, be a good Googler. Like that's like the trait that we're looking for, is just look up your own problems and try and solve them on their own. Because if, you know, there's two problems you're solving here. One is you're not causing a cascading problem of information. We're like, oh, I have to ask this person a question. They didn't get back to me. So now I'm stuck. Snowball effect of productivity loss. But also you're not bothering someone else. They have their own stuff that they need to be working on. And if you're sitting there unable to move forward because you can't answer your own question, maybe we should solve that problem first. And then we can talk about how we can do that in a calm, asynchronous environment.
I love that. Yesterday, I was talking to this founder who used to work at Uber. And he was telling me how at Uber, one of the values that they had was, I think they call it principle of confrontation. Which, so if you see something you don't like, you have to jump in right away and go against it and protest on it. And it kind of is making me think about, when we live in a remote world, he was telling me that this may work real well for like the extroverts, the ones that are more aggressive and want to like fight things right away. But in a asynchronous world, this gives people who want to take their time and think and kind of give a more calm, collected response, more opportunity to do that.
And I think that meeting culture as it is today makes us a large assumption that there are more people in your company that are comfortable performing on demand than there really are. You know, my designers love that we have Yac just for the pure purpose of like, they're not big presenters, like they're, creatives. They don't necessarily want to be in front of a large crowd, like talking about an idea. Even if they have an idea, a lot of times they just want to like ruminate on it for a little bit, come back with some, well thought out thoughts, maybe even read it off of a script sometimes, like, hey, I wrote some notes and I'm just going to like talk this out loud. And there's a huge effect on just their ability, the accessibility of it, as well as allowing someone to operate in an environment in which they're comfortable with, right? It's almost like inclusivity in a way. And I think meetings are not an inclusive space because it requires everyone, there's a pressure to have your camera on. Some people, don't want to get ready for the day in a remote environment and don't want to be on camera presenting. But there's a lot of interesting things that also happen when you go async, just in terms of communication methods. We have this thing that we talk about called the rubber duck method, which is this idea that if you have a bug or a problem or something you can't overcome, if you, talk to a rubber duck, whatever, this is a headphone case, talk to the headphone case and say like, here's the problem that I'm having, help me solve it. And of course, the rubber duck is not going to solve the problem for you, but it's really that you're speaking out loud for the first time. You can kind of hear yourself and self-solve, which is a really interesting thing about the power of just language and speaking. And what we found that's really interesting is, I'll get messages all the time from my team that, I can't figure out what to do here. This is really complicated. I don't know how to, overcome this. Never mind. I just figured it out. You can ignore this message. Yep, I'm good now, right? Because they like talked it out and like there was a light bulb moment where they're like, oh, I just needed to talk to somebody about it, right? You've been on those meetings where majority one person is talking, everyone else is listening, and at the end, you didn't really provide any value, but they felt like they got something out of it, right? It's the same thing in an asynchronous environment. It just doesn't waste the other person's time, right? I can put that message at 2x speed, cut it down to like a minute, 2-minute message that I can blow through. They got a ton of value out of it. I got a lot of insight into the way they think and what they're thinking about, concerns they might have, silly things. I could hear if they're sneezing, coughing, tired, happy, angry, right? I get a feel for like their tone. There's so much power in that. And I didn't even have to participate, which is an amazing, part of that.
I love that. It's got me thinking on the meetings that we have at Influence Podium, my company. Is there any meetings that you're like, we should do this live? Like we should make it in person. Are there any exceptions to asynchronous?
I think that's probably like the one thing that we learned this year over last year was, we took this very hard stance on like go async all the time. And I think we found that like there are times for synchronous. If you actually go to my like meeting URL, like book a meeting with me, it has two options. It says Zoom or Yac. And under real-time Zoom, it says for first-time meetings and complex discussions. And it says for everything else, just send me a Yac, and it has a link that adds you to a async discussion on Yac. And I think that's one of the big things that we had as a realization was like, if you could cut 80%, 50%, geez, even lower meetings out of your, day-to-day life, that's a massive win. We don't need to shoot for 100%. There are meetings that are great to do live, first-time introductions, planning meetings, decision-making meetings. All those are very complex, and sometimes it's great to do that stuff live. One thing that I will add, which we found really powerful, is a lot of times having an async component to those is actually the magic sauce. Doing a demo. I could do a demo async, send that off to my team, let them all consume that on their own time, fast forward, rewind, pause, skip through, whatever. And then let's have a sync discussion where we give feedback and ask questions. You don't need to sit there and watch me demo something for 45 minutes on a Zoom call, though. It's just like you're sitting there and I'm presenting. That easily could have been a recording. And that way you can come prepared to the meeting with questions and notes, right? And so having an async component to sync meetings is also kind of like a huge unlock.
I love that. And it does seem like if we don't push for 100%, more companies will be more receptive, right? Because if we tell them all of it has to be asynchronous, it's like, whoa, that's too much. But if we say like 50 to 70%, and once they like it, they start growing from that number, then I feel like it's an easy way to ease it in. We only have a few minutes left. I think we need to do part two. In this case, we can do part two over Yac probably and get it recorded.
Yeah.
But I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on how your role has changed as a CEO, right? Like you guys started as a small startup. You guys like still building that movement. How has your role changed? How are you feeling right now? How's the journey been so far from a mental level, emotional level? Kind of give us like the background of where you are right now compared to what you were like 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, when we started this, I actually was looking for a CEO to replace me because I am also CTO and I do both roles, which is it's a lot of work.
Fun.
And I think at the beginning, I thought I am highly underqualified to raise capital, put together pitch decks, run operations from a CEO level. I'd ran an agency before this, so I knew how to work with people and I knew how to work with deadlines and get product across the table. But I think I was a very not self-conscious might not be the right word, but self-aware or doubting myself as a CEO. I think one thing that's changed is becoming more and more confident in that role and understanding that I am very good on the CTO side, but I would be much better replacing myself as a CTO than replacing myself as a CEO. And so I think that was a shift that was really important in my journey, inside of this company and just as a singular person overall, was understanding that I actually can do really well here. And even having the technical knowledge that I have is actually very powerful as a CEO because it allows me to make good vision decisions moving forward and, allows me to work with whoever is going to replace that CTO position and not be the overbearing manager who has no clue what he's talking about, right? That little bit of technical knowledge that I have will allow me to be empathetic of deadlines and understanding of scale and, cost infrastructure and stuff like that. And at the same time, I can still be a very good CEO, as that transition has happened, like we're not currently raising capital, right? We raised our money. We're now heads down working on product and go to market. And that's where I thought I was, going to be fine at, and I was going to struggle with, the other stuff. And in fact, now that I'm like done with all the raising, I'm like happy and very, content with my past performance and excited kind of at future, opportunities to run that CEO role and maybe hand that CTO role off at a later point in time.
And it probably helps you hire better because you've been there. Like I used to be a writer, so when I look for now writers and content marketers, I know what I'm looking for because I've been on their shoes. And I appreciate you sharing that there was some doubt at some point. I think as CEOs, we're supposed to say, no, I had to figure it out from the beginning. I've doubted myself so many times for so long, and I still do at times. And I think that's the most normal thing to do. Justin, we're at the top of the hour. I would love to do part two sometime, but this is fantastic. I really appreciate you coming in and sharing all that stuff.
Yeah, man. Appreciate you having me.
No, absolutely. For everybody listening, we're going to put Justin's LinkedIn, Twitter on the link below. We're going to put Yac. Please use it, check it out, and we'll catch you next time. Thank you guys so much for listening.